What's on, ladies and gentlemen? My name's Ross, I like games, and today I'm going to do something I've been wanting to do for a long time. I've sat down, I've run the numbers, I've had a look at every format we have ever had in the One Piece TCG, and I've come up with what I believe to be the definitive list of the top 10 leaders we have had in the history of the One Piece TCG, which admittedly is only a couple of years, but still totally counts. Now, there are, of course, a bunch of things we need to take into account, and that is that not all the leaders have been out for the same amount of time, and then there's also what is more important to you. So, for instance, OBO4 Don Quixote Doflamingo was unquestionably the best deck in the OBO 4.5 meta, but it was like only good for that one time. Whereas we can have a look at the OBO1 Law, for instance, which has never been the best deck in the format, but has been a top 3 deck for a large part of the meta, and has always been there or thereabouts since we started the game back in OBO1. So the question becomes, which one do you prefer? And the answer is, look at the totality and hope it makes sense. But if you disagree with some of my rankings, that's probably where we've gone. Good. Quick shout out at what I think would be the number 11 deck, Enel. Good deck, but it's not the best mono yellow deck. There is a clear choice of best mono yellow deck. Cool deck, great leader skill that puts you from 0 life back up to 1. But honestly, doesn't make the top 10 list. Hardest one for me to leave off. In at number 10 is that Don Quixote Doflamingo from OBO4, which was 24% of the OBO 4.5 meta. It was a dominant deck in the OBO 4 meta by a wide margin. The best deck in that particular meta. But it wasn't particularly good before that, and it wasn't particularly good after that. In fact, it was like the 5th best deck before that, and I've really haven't seen it coming around since. There is an argument, well, not an argument, since then, OBO1 Doflamingo has actually been the best deck, but that's never really been good enough to force its way onto this list. Maybe that'll change in the future, but it's not changing now. The way the leader worked was, it's a green and purple leader, and at the end of your turn, you set up to 2 of your Don cards as active, so you can essentially use a Don during your turn, but then you can also use it to play some event cards during your opponent's turn. It's fun. In at number 9, we've got the Charlotte Katakuri from OPO3. This is one of those leaders that's never been the best deck in the format, but it has been a top deck for a large part of the time it's been out. So, again, using the numbers from Limitless TCG, 4th best deck in the OPO 3.5 meta, 4th best deck in the OPO 3 meta, 4th best deck in the OPO 4 meta, 2nd best deck behind Doflamingo in the 4.5 meta, 4th best deck in the OPO 5 meta, 3rd best deck in the OPO 6 meta. So it's largely been like the 4th best deck, but it's been consistently good for the whole time that it's been out, and that is, I think, pretty gosh darned important. Of course, the skill here is fine. Don X1, when attacking, look it up to 1 card from the top of your opponent's life, put it at the top or bottom, so that they do get a bad card or they don't get a good card, and then you gain a 1000 power buff. But of course, the fact that it is a Big Mum leader and it's yellow means you have access to the frankly ridiculous Charlotte Lin from OPO3, and having access to that card is one of the things that's made this such a good deck, because that has to be a Big Mum leader that you use it with. It means that it's limited. In at number 8, we've got the OPO1 Roa Noa Zoro, and this is another card that's never been the best deck, but it's always been a very, very good deck. It was the 2nd best deck in OPO2. Now, I lied to you. This is actually the best deck in the OPO3 meta, and then the 2nd best in OPO 3.5, and then the 3rd best in OPO4. But then it actually fell off pretty heavily after that. It's been a while since Zoro was a really top-tier deck back in OPO4, but it was the best deck in the OPO3 meta. And I'm starting to think this might be a little bit too low, but it is as it is, ladies and gentlemen. It is as it is. One of the more straightforward leaders we've actually had in the game. Because all it does is Dawn X1, your characters get an extra 1,000 power. It doesn't look great on the face of it, but 1,000 to all of your characters is just ridiculously good, and Red's got a bunch of good aggro cards, and that is all added up quite nicely. In at number 7, one of the more controversial picks on my list, the Starter Deck 2 Kid. And here's the thing, I know it's been a while since Kid was good, properly dropped off the map. But back in the OPO1 meta, when admittedly we did have a much smaller pool of leaders, according to LimitlessTCG.com, it was 44% of the meta, 44.2, and the next highest was Luffy at 15.7. So it wasn't just the best deck, it was the second most dominant deck, just behind OPO5 Sakazuki, more in that in a moment, and that one got banned for being so good. It was dominant in the OPO1 meta, to the point where I think it deserves to be this high on the list. As for the leader skill, activate main once per turn, pay free, trash a card from your hand, set this leader to active. Get 2 uses of your leader per turn, plus green was pretty good back in OPO1. That makes a lot of sense. In at number 6, we've got Red Green Law, which again, we're going back to OPO1. A lot of the early leaders are still repping quite nicely. Now, this is another weird one, because it was like the third best deck in OPO1, and then the third best in OPO2, and then the third best in OPO3, and then the third best in OPO 3.5, and then the second best in OPO 4, and then then the fifth best in OPO 4.5, and it's still kind of hanging on the fringes of the top 10 since then. And my point is, it's never been the best deck, it's never been the number 1 deck in any meta, but it's always been consistently good. Plus, great leader skill, it's a dual color red and green. Activate main once per turn, pay 2, and if you've got 5 characters in play, return 1 to your hand and play a 5 cost or lower of a different color, i.e. pick up a green, play a red, or pick up a red, play a green. But there were things like you could essentially replay Zoro with Rush, and then you would be able to use it multiple times, and it would have Rush every time. And things like that were kind of ridiculous. Never been the best deck, but it's been right there in multiple formats. That makes me happy to put it in at number 6. Now, in at number 5, we've got the brand new Rob Lucci from OPO7, the newest leader on this list. And I was surprised when I started digging into the data as to exactly how good this was. But I'll tell you right now, I feel comfortable putting it as a top 5 leader, even though it's been out in the West for a few weeks. Because if you look at the OPO7 meta right now, and admittedly, the OPO7 meta is still fairly new, it is the top deck. By a bit of a margin, and Nell is actually hanging on at number 2, but it's kind of 24% to 16. It's a 50% better than the second best deck in the meta. But we're going to get to Starter Deck 10 Lore in a minute. That is unquestionably the best deck in the meta over in Japan right now. They're ahead of us already in OPO8. And the only deck which is standing up to that is Rob Lucci. So we know it's phenomenal in OPO7, and we can look at Japan and know it's phenomenal in OPO8, and it might be a new deck, but it's already shown it's got the chops. Now, it's a mono black deck, and when attacking, you may trash 2 cards on the top of your deck to give one of your opponent's characters -1 cost during this turn. It's not actually, I'll stand by this, it's a fine leader skill, but it's not a particularly good leader skill. But firstly, you've got access to the Gecko Moria that lets you play 2 cards for free. It's one of the most broken cards in the game. But there's also a bunch of CP focused cards that have come around that have made this really good. And the support for this, I did a whole video about this the other day. Go check it out. The support for this makes this great. And the skill lowering cost, as well as being able to put cards in your trash, which is something black decks love to do. Yeah, add this all up, and I'm a very big fan. Great card. Top 5 leader. In at number 4, the other mono black leader, Gecko Moria. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. This one is the one on the list that I am concerned I may have put a little bit too high. However, if we go to the OBO 6 meta, bearing in mind that's when it came out, it wasn't in OPO 5, it was technically the second best deck, but really it was basically tied with Sakazuki at 29% of the meta, and everything else was like 11 or below. And this is important because, as we're going to talk about in a minute, Sakazuki's so good it literally got banned, and this was neck and neck. Now, it has dropped off a bit in the OPO 7 meta because Mono Black Rob Lucci is here. And this is where I'm having a dilemma with Gecko Moria, because it was so good in OPO 6, you know, neck and neck with a leader so good it got banned, but it kind of disappeared afterwards because there's a better Mono Black, and yet I'm putting this ahead of that Mono Black. But Rob Lucci has never been as dominant in any meta as Gecko Moria was in the OPO 6 meta. So look, if you want to swap these two around, I wouldn't be upset. And I do think if I do this list in a few months' time, there's a very good chance Rob Lucci jumps over it. But Gecko Moria was so good in the OPO 6 meta that I think it squeaks out Rob Lucci. But just to be clear, it is very, very close. Oh, in terms of what it actually does, because I haven't told you that one yet, which seems a little bit rude, what we've got from Gecko Moria here is a skill whereby Don X1, when attacking, pay 2, trash a card from your hand, and the top 2 cards of your deck, and play a Thriller Bark Pirates with a cost of 4 or less for free. It's not really free, but you know what I mean. Very good skill, very, very strong. And look, if you want to flick these around, that's fine. These are incredibly close, but I do think Rob Lucci and Gecko Moria are a fair bit above 6 to 10. But I think there's another big gap here. In at number 3, Starter Deck 10 Lore. I think the top 3 are the top 3 by a bit of a margin, and I do think Starter Deck 10 Lore has earned its way there. Right now, over in Japan, they're in the OPO 8 meta, and I know we're going forward a little bit here. But in the first 6 events in the OPO 8 meta, there were obviously 12 finalists. 10 of the finalists were Starter Deck 10 Lore. The other 2 were Rob Lucci, which explains what I was saying about Lucci being the only deck that can stand up to it. And the thing is, Red Purple Lore has not been a powerhouse deck outside of this. In the OPO 4.5 meta, it's a top 3 deck. It's fine. But then it drops off quite a bit when we get to OPO 5. It's a top 4 deck in OPO 6. It's a top 4 deck in OPO 7. But when we get to OPO 8, it is the best deck by a mile. And it is dominant. And the reason I'm putting it in at number 3 here is because we got a deck that's kind of holding on as a probably top 4 deck for a few formats, but then explodes into inarguably the best deck in the meta, and I think that puts it above the other cards that I've shown here. And the main reason is Black Maria. There's other reasons, but Black Maria is the big thing that comes around in OPO 8, which changes the fortunes of Starter Deck 10 Lore. Lets you put 5 Don out, and then you've got to put them back at the end of your turn until you're tied with your opponent, but you get to put 5 out. And Lore's leader skill is Don -3, and you put one of your opponent's characters of 3,000 power or less to the bottom of its owner's deck, and then play a 4 cost or less of your own for free. And the reason Lore was never the best deck was because it was hard to use that skill every turn. Black Maria means you can use it every turn. It becomes the best deck in the meta, so in at number 3. In at number 2, Edward Newgate. So good, it had to be temporarily banned. And Edward Newgate is one of those. It came around in OPO2, best deck in the meta. OPO3, second best deck in the meta. OPO 3.5, best deck in the meta. OPO 4, best deck in the meta. And then they banned it and it stopped being so good. But from OPO 2 through to when they banned it, temporarily, admittedly, it was the best deck in the meta. And it was still, 6th best in OPO 5, 5th best in OPO 6. It was so good for so long. And even after basically designing cards to beat it, it was so good we literally saw the card designers bigging up other stuff because it was too dominant. Like, they unbanned it because they'd managed to get the game to a point where it was less dominant. And it still hangs on and does well sometimes. But really, that run of OPO2 to they banned it halfway through the OPO4 meta, that means it has to be in at number 2 for me. 6,000 power on a leader, absurd. 6 life, absurd. And sure, you have to take a life at the end of every turn, which is annoying, but that does actually give you card advantage as well. We still have one banned card in the game right now, in the English version of the game. Because Whitebeard is so good, we've actually had to leave a card banned. Don't know how many of you remember it. It's Moby Dick. And basically what it does is your Edward Newgate and all of your characters, if you've got 1 or less life, gain 2,000 power. If they unbanned Moby Dick, I am convinced that Whitebeard would be back to a top tier deck. They've literally got to keep this card banned because Whitebeard is so good. So what's in at number 1? It's really obvious. It's Sakazuki. Like, Sakazuki, they banned it, and it's going to stay banned. It has to be number 1. In the OPO5 meta, it was 3 times a Nell, which was the second best deck. 46% to just under 16. It was the best deck in the OPO6 meta, and then they went and banned it. But it was by far the best deck in OPO5, the best deck in OPO6, and then banned. I went, yeah, we're done here. Like, this card was a mistake. This card is literally too good. So, if you've been following the One Piece TCG, there's no drama here. This was always going to be number 1. Before I looked at any data, any results, I spent a long time researching this video. But before I even started, I put Sakazuki number 1 and Newgate number 2. And I found nothing in all my research and all my tournament results pouring through to change things. Firstly, for me, it's a colour combination blue and black that's so gosh darn good. But also, it's got an activate main that draws 1 trash, is 1 great for consistency, and when attacking, so every turn, you get to give -1 cost, which really helps out with black. And we've all seen the Rob Lucci Rebecca combination with Hina, and yeah. Basically, Sakazuki can just clear your board almost every turn. And it's got built-in consistency. It's absurd, honestly. Absolutely absurd. When I casted One Piece Euros back in January, the top 4 was all Rob Lucci decks. And nobody should be surprised about that. It had to be banned. It was literally too good. Had to be done. And they did. So there we go. Number 1 by a mile. I know some of the bottom bits of this list you can argue with, especially Gecko, Moria and Rob Lucci. You could easily flip those 2 around, but I feel good about this list. Things like a Nell being left off kind of sucks, but every card on this list was either dominant in its respective metagame or better for longer than a Nell ended up being. But I do just want to mention, yes, I know a Nell. Yes, I seriously considered putting a Nell on this list. No, I don't think a Nell should have been on the list. But please don't think I'm ignoring it or I've forgotten about it. I know it was the second best deck in OPO5. I know it's trending as the second best deck in OPO7. But one of the factors here is that in both of those metas, there was a dominant deck that is way better than it. So there we go. There's my list, and I'm sure you won't agree with all of it, although I feel great about the top 3. But now it's over to you guys. Tell me which of these leaders you would put higher, but if you put some leaders higher, you have to then tell me which ones you would put down. If you're putting some leaders lower, you have to tell me which ones you would put up. And honestly, the easiest way to do it, give me a full top 10 in the comment section. Go nuts! Be nice! And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWasi. That's where we talk about One Piece and a bunch of other card games. And please do consider checking out patreon.com/PTCG Radio, where you can support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all kinds of fun things. But by far the most important thing as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching Wasi Plays.